Joining us now, Yvette Cooper. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Kay.
What were you going to do to stop the boats?
Well, we've seen the images you've seen is dangerous boat crossings that are undermining our border security and putting lives at risk. That's why we need to boost our border security and also fix the chaos in the asylum system, including cross-border police to work actually in other European countries, not just along the French coast, but in Germany, in Belgium, through Bulgaria, right across Europe, where these supply lines are coming, so that we stop boats reaching the French coast in the first place, so that we can properly smash the criminal gang networks, and also have fast-track systems when people arrive in the UK, so you fast-track decisions for safe countries, and have a new returns and enforcement unit because, unfortunately, returns have dropped by nearly 50% under the Conservatives. That's for failed asylum cases. That means the system's not just not being enforced. So we've got to tackle both the asylum chaos in the system in the UK and also boost and strengthen our border security to prevent boats arriving in the first place.
The government says that's not much of a plan. In fact, it's not a plan at all. And what you would do is scrap this law if you did come into power. What would you say in response?
So the problem with the Rwanda scheme is this is an extortionately expensive gimmick, that it's not a serious plan to tackle these dangerous boat crossings, and it's costing us around over £500 million for just 300 people. It's less than 1% of asylum seekers, and there's no plan. The government has no plan at all for the 99%. So it adds up to around nearly £2 million per asylum seeker. That money could be going into substantially boosting our border security instead. And that's the damage. There's the sort of distraction of the government's focus just on having the gimmick, the headlines, on something that really not even senior Conservatives think will work.
What would you say to the commercial airline which the government says they have on standby to take people to Rwanda?
Well, the government, we know, will be making all sorts of practical arrangements, actually extremely costly ones, because we know the costs have gone up.
Airline?
I think that's a matter for the government to make the contracts and things that it wants to do. But the problem is, it is writing cheques for taxpayers' money. The first thing that they're going to do is actually not about what they do with an airline. It's not about letters that go out to people or detention centres or any of the things in the papers. The first thing they're going to do is write another cheque for £50 million to Rwanda, even though so far more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers have gone to Rwanda, but yet their first act is going to be to write another unconditional £50 million cheque. I don't think that's the right approach to taxpayers' money. We need to tackle these dangerous crossings. We need to make sure we've got stronger border security, and we need to make sure we're not just spending loads of money on a gimmick that's just about headlines.
But given that the infrastructure is now or soon will be in place, is it something that you would keep at least in the interim?
Well, we think we should replace this because you need to put...
Yeah, but would you keep it in the interim?
Well, the problem is that all they're doing each time is they're just writing more and more cheques. So at every stage, you know, even in order to set up flights, even in order to send 300 people, they'll have to write another £120 million cheque. So at every stage, even for this small scheme that's just 1% of asylum seekers arriving, that will still cost hundreds of millions of pounds more. And we just think we shouldn't be writing those cheques to Rwanda. We should be putting that money straight away, quickly, into this plan to go after the criminal gangs and strengthen our border security.
So from day
instead.
one, if you win the next general election, you will scrap this scheme. Nobody during a Labour government will go to Rwanda.
Well, we will replace it. What you can't do is just stick with the status quo. That is clearly not working. So the point is to replace the Rwanda scheme with the cross-border policing, the new returns and enforcement unit, so that you actually properly make the system work and properly strengthen border security.
But can you envisage a situation where at least some people in the interim will find themselves under a potential Labour government going to Rwanda?
We're not going to do the Rwanda scheme because every time you do, you have to write more cheques. No, we're not going to do the Rwanda scheme.
So nobody will go?
So our plan is not to do the Rwanda scheme. Instead, it's to put the money instead into investing actually in our border security and preventing boats arriving in the first place. No, that's not our plan.
OK. Talk to me about the anti-Semitism row last weekend. It's likely to spill over again next weekend because we've heard from the man in question, Gideon Falter, who says that he will walk perhaps with some of his friends again next to a pro-Palestinian march next weekend. What's Labour's view?
Well, I think we had the incident last weekend, and obviously it was wrong what the police officer had said and the initial response from the Metropolitan Police. I do, though, think the police have a really complex and challenging job. We have the historic right to protest in this country, and that is long-standing, and there are people with very strong views, particularly about what is happening in Gaza. There can never be any place for anti-Semitism, and there has to be strong action against anti-Semitism, and people have a right to free speech and to express their views. What the police are trying to do...
This wasn't anti-Semitism, though, was it?
No, but there have been cases, and there were some other shouts. No, and there were some shouts from the crowd. That police officer was not anti-Semitic. No. But I think But what I think he said about being openly Jewish was the wrong thing to say. What you did hear, I thought, for some of the footage, suggested that there were some shouts that were troubling from the crowd.
From the protesters.
Exactly. But so that has to be dealt with. But I think we also have to recognise that the police are trying to do a serious job to keep people safe. They are working immensely hard to do so. I think the calls that we had, for example, earlier in the week for the Metropolitan Commissioner to resign were completely wrong. I think the Metropolitan Police Commissioner is working really hard to keep London safe, actually, to reform the Metropolitan Police as well, and to make sure that it is responsive to communities. But these are difficult situations, and the police are in the middle of that, trying to make sure that everyone is kept safe, and we should recognise the important job they are doing.
So even when your Home Secretary faced with this sort of challenge, and you've got the Met Commissioner in front of you, and he's faced potentially with a similar situation, what would you be asking him about ahead of next weekend's stroll, walk versus march?
Well, the first thing is that the operational policing decisions have to be left to the police. That is an important constitutional principle that we have in this country. It's also the best way of making sure you get effective decisions rather than politicians who don't have experience of public order policing.
Let me interject there, if I may. Do you think wrong decisions were made last weekend?
I think there was wrong wording was used, wrong handling was taken. But actually, I am not going to second-guess decisions made by officers who are trying to deal with very complex public order situations. They've got to make the best decision that they can in those circumstances, dealing with issues around wanting to keep everybody safe in those circumstances.
But the Home Office Minister, who was sat there an hour ago, said to me that people should be allowed to walk through a march if they want to.
That has to be a public order decision for the police. I mean, I've been in situations where there were marches going past where the police will ask you to, could you take this route, could you take that route, and so on. And I think, those in the end have got to be decisions for the police. We want everybody to feel safe on the streets of the capital. That is really important. We want people to be able to go where they need to go, and for people to be able to say the things that they feel as well. So you've got to challenge any anti-Semitism. You've also got to have the historic traditions, whether it be of free speech or of protest that we've got. And the police, we just recognise they do have a challenging job caught in the middle of all of that, and, recognise how complex it is for them to do that job.
Will you be celebrating St George's Day like the boss?
Do you know, we have, in Pontefract, we very often have the St George's flag flying from Pontefract Castle. And so, yes, we very often have had the bunting up. And actually, yesterday we were at St George's Park, where the England team train, which was brilliant as well.
So, yes, is the answer.
Happy St George's Day, Kate. Happy St George's Day.
It's good to see you, as always. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.